what it actually means if sports genuinely don't excite you. Have you ever sat in a room full of people absolutely losing their minds over a game and felt nothing? Not annoyed, not superior, just genuinely, completely unmoved. While everyone around you is screaming at a screen, gripping their jerseys, maybe crying a little, you're sitting there thinking, I don't understand why this matters so much. And maybe you've wondered, is something wrong with me? Because we live in a world where sports are practically a social language. They're at every family gathering, every office conversation, every first date icebreaker. Not following sports can sometimes feel like not speaking the native tongue of wherever you live. But here's what nobody actually tells you. The fact that your brain doesn't light up for sports, it's not a deficiency, it's a signal. And what it's pointing to about your psychological makeup is actually fascinating. What's really happening inside your brain? Let's start with the biology, because this is where it gets interesting. Your brain has a system called the reward pathway, and it runs on dopamine. When something triggers this system, you feel anticipation, excitement, that almost addictive pull to keep watching, keep following, keep caring. For a lot of people, sports activate this system powerfully. The unpredictability of a game, the tribal identity of cheering for a team, the shared emotional highs and lows, all of it floods the reward system with signal. But here's the thing. Not everyone's reward pathway responds equally to the same inputs. Think of it like this. Some people taste spicy food and their whole face lights up. Others eat the exact same dish and feel nothing, maybe mild discomfort. Same food, completely different neurological response. Research in psychology refers to this as reward sensitivity, how strongly your brain responds to specific types of stimulation. And it varies significantly from person to person. It's not a choice. It's not a character flaw. It's just how your particular brain is calibrated. For people who don't feel drawn to sports, those external triggers, competition, crowd energy, team rivalry, all of it doesn't move the needle for someone raised to care deeply about it. But here's what's equally true. That same reward system is probably firing very strongly for something else in your life. Music, ideas, creative projects, solving complex problems, deep conversation. Your brain isn't broken, it's just tuned to a different frequency. The identity piece nobody talks about. There's another layer here, and it goes deeper than just neurological preference. Social psychologists have spent decades studying something called social identity theory, the idea that humans are wired to build a sense of self through group membership, and sports teams are one of the most powerful group identity mechanisms humans have ever created. When someone says, "We won last night," they weren't on the field, they don't know any of the players personally, but psychologically, the team's victory becomes their victory. The team's loss becomes their loss. That "we" is doing a lot of psychological work. For millions of people, this tribal belonging is deeply satisfying. It answers a fundamental human need, the need to be part of something. But here's what's worth understanding about yourself if you don't feel that pull. Some people are simply less dependent on group-based identity to feel connected. They satisfy that need for belonging differently through close individual relationships, shared values, creative communities, or intellectual pursuits. It doesn't mean they're isolated or cold. Often it means the opposite. People who don't rely on group identity for belonging tend to form deeper, more individualized connections. They don't need a team jersey to feel like they're part of something. They build belonging in quieter, more personal ways. The blueprint from childhood. This is the part that makes everything click into place. Research consistently shows that our strongest emotional associations, the ones that stick for life, are built in childhood. Not through logic, through repetition and emotional imprinting. If you grew up in a household where Saturday meant the whole family gathered around the television, where your parents' moods rose and fell with match results, where sports was the backdrop of your most vivid childhood memories, your brain built a deep emotional architecture around it. But if you didn't, If sports were simply absent from your environment or present but emotionally neutral, your brain never laid down those tracks. There was no emotional scaffolding built. And this matters because by the time you're an adult, the absence doesn't feel like loss. It just feels like a gap you never noticed was there, because your brain never expected it. This is why people who don't follow sports rarely feel like they're missing out. They're not suppressing interest. The interest simply was never built. What your cognitive style might be telling you. Here's where it gets really revealing. Psychologists who study cognitive styles, the way different minds prefer to engage with information, have found that people fall along a spectrum. On one end, you have people drawn to concrete, immediate, high-stimulation experiences, fast feedback, clear winners and losers. The scoreboard tells you everything you need to know in real time. On the other end, you have people drawn to abstract, slow burn, complexity-seeking engagement. They want to sit with ambiguity. They're energized by things that don't resolve quickly, by processes, systems, questions that don't have easy answers. Sports, by design, are built for the first cognitive style. They provide immediate feedback loops, clear rules, visible outcomes. There's a beauty in that simplicity. But if you're someone who naturally gravitates towards the second cognitive style, if you find yourself more energized by ideas that unfold slowly, by questions that deepen the more you explore them, the immediate resolution of sports might actually feel unsatisfying rather than thrilling. You're not wired for short feedback loops. You're wired for depth. And that wiring, it tends to show up consistently across every area of life. In the books you gravitate towards, the conversations that energize you, the problems you voluntarily lose sleep over. The emotional regulation angle. There's one more piece worth naming. Sports are emotionally volatile by design. The whole point is the unpredictability. You don't know how it ends. That uncertainty is the engine of excitement for fans. But research in emotional regulation shows that people differ significantly in how they process that kind of emotional volatility. For some, unpredictable emotional swings are genuinely pleasurable. The highs feel higher when the lows were real. For others, and this is not a weakness, it's simply a different nervous system, that emotional roller coaster is genuinely uncomfortable. Not because they can't handle emotion, but because they prefer their emotional energy to move towards things that feel meaningful to them specifically. They'd rather feel deeply about something they've chosen, a project, a relationship, a creative work, than feel wildly about something that's happening to strangers on a field. That's not detachment, that's discernment. So, if you're someone who's never been able to manufacture enthusiasm for sports, here's what the psychology is actually pointing to. Your brain's reward system is calibrated differently. You likely satisfy the need for belonging through individual connection rather than group identity. You didn't receive the emotional imprinting in childhood that builds lifelong sports attachment. You may have a cognitive style that prefers depth over immediacy. And you probably regulate your emotions by investing them in things that feel personally meaningful. None of that is unusual. None of it is wrong. It simply means your brain has its own architecture, its own particular way of finding meaning, connection, and excitement in the world. The person who cries when their team scores a goal isn't more passionate than you. They're just passionate about that. And you're passionate about something else. Maybe you just haven't named it out loud yet. A final thought. Here's something worth sitting with. We live in a culture that has a very visible, very loud set of approved passions. Sports, celebrity culture, entertainment franchises, things you can discuss with strangers in elevators and feel instantly connected. If your passions don't fall into that category, if the things that light you up are quieter, more personal, harder to explain in 30 seconds, you might have spent years wondering if there's something off about you. There isn't. Your brain just refuses to perform enthusiasm it doesn't genuinely feel. And honestly, that's a kind of integrity. The goal was never to care about what everyone else cares about. The goal is to understand why you are the way you are, and to stop apologizing for it. If this hits something in you, something you felt but never had language for, Drop a comment and tell me what actually lights your brain up. I'm genuinely curious. And if you want to go deeper into how your brain works and why you're wired the way you are, there's another video right after this one. I think you'll find it even more interesting than this one. See you there.